Here at Linkage, we find and bring to you the best thought leaders and the best leadership development resources in the world. We're a global network of the most valuable ideas and the brightest minds in professional development, focused on making people and companies great. This distance learning program is just one way that Linkage is helping connect high-performing leaders and organizations to the futures they want to create. Through our conferences and institutes, training programs, consulting and research offerings, and our published resources and assessment instruments, Linkage is committed to bringing you ideas, education, and best practice information when and how you want it. On behalf of everyone at Linkage, thanks for being with us today. And now, on with the program.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth program in Linkage's 2010 Thought Leader Series. I'm Rich Rozier, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. We're coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada, and you're watching this program along with thousands of viewers throughout the world. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're very pleased today to welcome Mr. Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm has an incomparable gift for interpreting new ideas in the social sciences and making them understandable, practical, and valuable to businesses and general audiences alike. Malcolm is a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, as well as the phenomenally successful author of the bestsellers The Tipping Point and Blink. Malcolm's third consecutive bestseller, Outliers, The Story of Success, is having an even greater impact than his first two. In Outliers, Malcolm suggests an exciting new approach to helping people succeed by using the factors that really foster success. And so with that, let's get started. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks. Well, welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining me this morning. I feel a little bit like I'm filming an infomercial, and I'll be selling rotisserie ovens later in the program. But no, I wanted to talk this morning about what it takes to build high-performing creative organizations. And I realize that's an enormous topic for one single speech. So I thought I'd try and focus the discussion by using one case study. And the case study I want to use is the rock band Fleetwood Mac. Now, I realize that sounds kind of a strange example to use, but I know for a fact that at least half of you out there at some point in your life made out to a Fleetwood Mac song, so I know it has personal relevance. And I also, if you think about it, what is Fleetwood Mac? It's an incredibly successful creative organization that thrived for an incredibly long time in one of the most competitive and demanding consumer marketplaces we know. So I think actually they're a really good case study to examine this question of what makes successful organizations work. So what I want to do this morning is simply tell the story of Fleetwood Mac and try and pull out lessons that I think will be relevant to all of us when we examine this question of what makes great groups, organizations work. So you're going to learn far more about Fleetwood Mac than you ever expected. I'm warning you before I start. But the story of Fleetwood Mac begins with a legendary R&B guitarist named Peter Green, who in the annals of rock and roll, Peter Green is up there with Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page as a guitarist. And he forms a band in London with a drummer named Mick Fleetwood and a bassist named John McVie, hence the name Fleetwood Mac. And they play in England for a while and they build up a following. And then they move to California. And while they're in California, Mick Fleetwood is in a supermarket in Van Nuys. And he runs into an old friend of his from England who says, "You really need to come to my recording studio." So Mick Fleetwood says, sure, and he shows up at the recording studio. And while he's getting the tour, he sees these two people singing, and he can't get over how incredible they sound. And he says to his friend, "Who are those two?" And his friend says, "The guy is Lindsey Buckingham, and the woman is Stevie Nicks." right? And they're this unknown duo who have had no real success so far in rock and roll, but Mick Fleetwood thinks they're fantastic. And he goes home, and a couple weeks later, one of the key members of Fleetwood Mac drops out. And so Mick Fleetwood calls his friend and says, can I get together with those two people I saw, Buckingham and Nicks, and get them to try out for us? And the guy says, sure. And he gives them a number, and they go and they meet, the band members go and meet Stevie Nicks. She's working as a waitress in some 20s themed flapper bar in Hollywood. And they meet her after work, and they all get really, really drunk on tequila, and they hit it off.
Okay, we're back with Malcolm Gladwell to answer your questions. We have plenty of great questions coming in. Our first question comes to us from Brent from the University of Texas, who asks, what role do mentors or life coaches play in the compensation strategy?
I think a lot. In fact, it's a very important point. So you asked the question, why is it that some people are able to compensate for their weakness, don't get defeated by these kinds of circumstances? Right? What separates them from those who are defeated? And one of the answers is that those who can successfully compensate are those who can access other resources around them. So, and having mentors in place or people who can give guidance on that kind of thing is absolutely crucial. When I listed all of those entrepreneurs who managed to be such extraordinary successes despite having a learning disability, I remember actually I had a long conversation with one of these guys, a guy named Paul Orfila, who started Kinko's. He's a fascinating guy. And there's a guy who absolutely struggled in school, but what he came from a family. They weren't wealthy, but they were entrepreneurial. He had role models in his life of how you make your way in the business world that he was able to kind of keep his eye on and look at and model himself after, even as he was going through all of these extraordinary personal struggles. So there's this. It's absolutely and it's the same thing with Fleetwood Mac. Why don't they go away when Peter Green abandons them for Germany? The answer is that they had a support system. They had a record label that who took their job seriously, who understood that their job wasn't just to market records and cash checks, but to develop talent, right? A notion that no longer exists in the record industry, and took that notion of talent development seriously, right? And said, even though you may have lost your most important member, there's still something there of value, and we're not going to give up on you. Right?
Yep.
And I think that's a beautiful and sadly an imperiled idea.
Great. So I want to come back to the development because I know we have lots of questions coming in, but a follow-up to this last question from Brian. He writes, about the compensation strategy. You talk about working harder and being hungrier as keys to success. What happened to working smarter, not harder?
Well, working smarter is not enough, and working harder is not enough. You have to do both. I mean, implicit in the idea of the 10,000 hours, by the way, is exactly this, that it isn't simply that you have to put in a certain amount of time in order to be good. You have to put in a certain kind of time as well. Those 10,000 hours must be what they call deliberate practice. So it must be focused, intensive, organized practice. When Michael Jordan practiced basketball, he did not practice the same way some JV high school player practices, right? What he did is he sat down and he very carefully and specifically identified his weaknesses and systematically went after